I am live. It is still Wednesday, the 29th of May 2024, and I'm reading out of The Laird and the Lady. And it's quite interesting at the moment. This is a novel by Joan Marshall Grant. She wrote 7 of her books on her own past lives, reincarnation. Some very interesting lives she lived, life as Carola and Winged Pharaoh, and before Moses was born, and The Eyes of Horus. Very interesting books. Anyway, this is a novel, a romantic novel. Marylda is a millionaires, and she's now married to Rowan, and they're in his castle in Scotland. Nobody knows yet how wealthy she is. The River, Chapter 13. Although Marylda no longer tried to shut out unlikely experience, but instead made deliberate effort to become more sensitive to it, she had nothing to report to Duncan until the end of August, because on her arrival at Cloud there had seemed something odd about the entrance to the drive. She went several times to look at the empty gate posts, but they were no more than pillars of weathered stone, stained with rust from the iron that once had been the pivots of hinges. She was on her way to the village. Sunshine after rain was making the puddles brilliant as polished silver, when without surprise she saw, between the lichened stone, a pair of gates, their iron tracery elaborate as birch trees in winter. Every detail remained clear until a car passed along the road beyond the bridge, when they instantly retreated to their own dimension. But they had stayed in focus long enough for her to make from memory a drawing of their intricate design. She found in the library a folio of Italian art of the 18th century. The style was sufficiently similar to suggest the gates were either of the same period or careful copies. She took the sketch and the folio to Dalloch and showed them to Duncan. "Ever been in the loft above the great barn?" he asked. She shook her head. "They keep hay up there, but there's something more interesting than hay. I'll drive back with you. We can tell Rowan you met me on the road." "Rowan's gone out with Georgina. They won't be back until after tea." It was dark in the loft until Duncan opened a door, through which bales were swung up from the yard on a pulley. "I'll have to get a pitchfork," he said, leaving her in the musty warmth while he climbed down the ladder through the square opening in the floor. He tossed the hay expertly until a corner of the loft was free. Half hidden in the chaff were the gates. "I've often wondered why they were here," he said. "I asked Georgina years ago. She told me not to be so inquisitive, and then said they had been taken down because they were unsafe." He compared their pattern carefully with Marylda's drawing. "It's far too accurate to be a coincidence. The seahorse motif doesn't appear in any of the illustrations in the folio." "So we've got one step further," said Marylda, half glad, half fearful of her accuracy. "We know that Emily must have bought them, probably at the same time as the statues in the Italian garden, and that either Hector or Georgina hid them up here after she had gone. We know they hate her, so why did she want to come back to the place from which she ran away?" "That's what we've got to discover," said Duncan. "And until we do, we must be careful that no one finds out that we, like the elephant's child, are suffering from insatiable curiosity." For nearly a fortnight nothing else occurred. Since Janet had gone, Marylda and Rowan seemed to have recaptured the carefree happiness they had known in France. Even shooting was less repugnant when he so obviously enjoyed himself more in her company. She no longer felt alien, for the permanence of Cloud, the grandeur of hills, the constellation of trees, the secrecy of woodland paths gave her a new security. She was fishing on a drowsy evening when even the water over the falls seemed to have forgotten its usual tumult. When she looked up to see a woman standing on a flat rock in midstream, leaning back against the pull of a salmon rod. She wore waders and a Norfolk jacket of cardry tweed to match her deerstalker. There was something familiar about her. Too familiar. Don't run away. Be very quiet and try to get close to her. Remember, if you let yourself be afraid, she will vanish as though you were looking into still water, and fear was the stone that shattered the reflection. Marylda dropped her rod and walked quietly along the bank. The setting sun glittered on the sliding water that, below the rock on which the woman stood, churned slowly above a deep pool. She felt the line slacken and began to reel it in. This might be the same fish that Hector lost yesterday. He said it had been all of 20 pounds. The fish plunged and the line whirred through the wheel. Where was Robbie? She called him. He must have the gaff ready. The salmon had only feigned exhaustion. With a surge he was upriver. The rod bent on to drag on the line, off the line. She braced her feet and leant back, setting her weight against the power of the fish. He turned, and in the sudden slackening, she lost her footing on the slippery rock, fell backwards. The rushing water closed over her. She tried to swim, but the heavy waders were full of water, holding her down. She made a despairing effort to get free of them. Marylda found herself lying on the bank, her head on Robbie's knee. She gulped and then unsteadily said, "Oh, Robbie, you must have come just in time. I nearly drowned and I lost the salmon." "Was it a fine fish?" "I believe it was the same that Sir Hector lost yesterday." "Maybe we shall get the better of him another day. And how did you come to fall in?" "From the big rock. It was difficult to keep my footing in waders, which you are not wearing, and why should you, when there has not been a salmon in this river since I was a young man?" said Robbie quietly. She sat up, looking down at her brogues, her tweed skirt dark with water. "I did fall in." "Yes, you fell in, and it was lucky that I heard you call before you got worse than a wetting. It was from the same pool that I pulled out Miss Emily 48 years ago. She nearly drowned, though I was so close at hand for her waders dragged her down." "Robbie, you must tell me the truth. Did I do anything odd before I fell?" "Well, if it's the truth you wish, can I be sure you won't speak of it to those who may prefer not to understand?" "You can be sure, but please tell me. I need to know." "You were standing on the rock, leaning back with your hand up, as though you were holding a rod, with a strong fish pulling against you." "But I had no rod?" "You had no rod, except, perhaps, Miss Emily's, that Sir Hector burned after she went away." "But she came back, Robbie. Do you know why she came back?" "I have always hoped to help her find her rest before I die. You see, I have always been in sympathy with Miss Emily, for she told me her troubles when she was too proud to speak of them to anyone else. She asked me to call her Miss Emily, because she was homesick at times." "Miss Emily? Why did that name suddenly have a new significance? Nanny Lovell had said Miss Emily long ago when Marylda had asked her why there was a name heavily scored out in the family Bible. Your father had an elder sister who brought disgrace on the family, and no one speaks of her now." Nanny had added, "I loved Miss Emily, but had refused to say any more. A child's curiosity had not endured against careful silence." "I had an aunt called Emily, but she died long before I was born," said Marylda slowly. "It's not an uncommon name. And now you must go back to the castle and take off those wet clothes, for here is Sir Rowan come to look for you." She saw her husband running down the bank. "Darling, what's happened? You're soaking." "She slipped trying to cross by the stones," said Robbie placidly. "It was idiotic of me," Marylda said quickly. "I misjudged the distance between two rocks and thought I could jump farther than I can." She managed to laugh as though it had been no more than a trivial accident. "Oh, why did Rowan come before I could ask Robbie the surname of Miss Emily? It mustn't be Blenkinsop. Please, please don't let it happen that I'm not only another American heiress, but that I am her niece." That was the end of chapter 13. Chapter 14 is entitled Grandmother.